Judy Garland was putting on her makeup when she heard the crying. Not the usual backstage noise, not the orchestra warming up, not the crew shouting directions. This was different. This was the sound of someone's heart breaking in real time. And Judy Garland, despite being exhausted, despite having her own demons to fight, couldn't ignore it. It was December 3rd, 1961, the Palace Theater in New York City. Judy was 39 years old and in the middle of what would become one of the most legendary concert runs in Broadway history. Every single show had been sold out for months. Tickets were going for triple their face value on the black market. If you wanted to see Judy Garland live at the Palace Theater in 1961, you needed money, connections, or a miracle. Sarah Mitchell had none of those things. She was 19 years old, a factory worker from a small town outside Cleveland, Ohio. She'd grown up watching The Wizard of Oz every year on television. While other kids her age were listening to Elvis and the Beatles, Sarah would sit in her tiny bedroom and play Judy's records on repeat. Over the Rainbow, The Trolley Song, The Man That Got Away. Those songs weren't just music to Sarah. They were lifelines. Sarah's childhood hadn't been easy. Her father had left when she was 6. Her mother worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. There were nights when Sarah went to bed hungry, nights when the electricity got shut off, nights when she felt so alone that she thought the world had forgotten she existed. But then she would put on a Judy Garland record, close her eyes, and for those few minutes, she felt like someone understood her pain. Because Judy sang like someone who had suffered. She sang like someone who knew what it felt like to be broken but still had to get up and face the world with a smile. By the time Sarah turned 19, she'd saved every spare penny she could for one purpose: to see Judy Garland perform live. It took her 18 months of skipping lunches, taking extra shifts at the factory, saying no to movies and dates and anything that cost money. 18 months to save $200. Enough for a train ticket to New York and what she thought would be enough for a ticket to the show. She didn't tell anyone what she was doing. Her mother would have called her crazy. Her friends wouldn't have understood. So, Sarah kept it to herself, counting the days, imagining the moment she would finally see Judy Garland in person. On December 2nd, 1961, Sarah boarded a Greyhound bus in Cleveland. The trip took 14 hours. She didn't sleep. She was too excited. She clutched her small suitcase and stared out the window, watching the landscape change from Ohio farmland to the towering buildings of New York City. When the bus pulled into Port Authority, Sarah felt like she'd entered another world. She found a cheap boarding house in Hell's Kitchen, a place that charged $3 a night for a room the size of a closet. She didn't care. She wasn't there to sightsee. She was there for one reason. That evening, she walked to the Palace Theater on Broadway. The marquee was lit up like a beacon. Judy Garland. 2 shows nightly. Sarah stood on the sidewalk, staring up at those lights, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. The moment she'd been dreaming about for 18 months. She walked up to the box office window. The man behind the glass barely looked at her. "Can I help you?" "Yes," Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly. "I'd like 1 ticket for tonight's show, please." The man glanced at a chart. "Sold out." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "What about tomorrow night?" "Sold out." "The next night?" "Lady," the man said, finally looking at her, "we're sold out for the next 6 weeks. If you want a ticket, you'll have to buy from a scalper, and they're going for about $150 a pop." Sarah's face went pale. She had $47 left after paying for the bus, the boarding house, and a sandwich at a diner. There was no way she could afford a scalp ticket. But, she started. "No buts," the man interrupted. "That's the price. Take it or leave it." And then he pulled down the shade on the window. Sarah stood there on the sidewalk as people rushed past her. Theatergoers in fancy clothes, laughing and chatting, holding their tickets like they were nothing special. To them, it was just another night out. To Sarah, it was everything. She felt the tears coming, but she tried to hold them back. She walked around to the side of the theater into the alley, where she could be alone. That's where the dam finally broke. She sat down on a crate, buried her face in her hands and sobbed. She'd come so far. She'd saved for so long. She'd imagined this moment 1,000 times. And now it was over before it even began. She would never see Judy Garland. She would go home tomorrow with nothing but a memory of standing outside a theater, crying in an alley like a fool. Inside the theater, Judy Garland was in her dressing room. She was tired. The kind of tired that comes from performing 2 shows a night, 6 nights a week, while also battling insomnia, stage fright, and the ghosts of everything Hollywood had done to her. But she was getting ready, putting on her stage makeup, adjusting her costume, trying to summon the energy to go out there and give 2,000 people the performance they paid for. That's when she heard it. Crying. Faint, but unmistakable. Judy paused. She looked at her assistant, a woman named Margaret. "Do you hear that?" Margaret listened. "I think someone's crying outside." Judy stood up and walked to the small window in her dressing room. Faced the alley. She pushed it open and looked down. There, sitting on a crate, was a young woman. She was clutching something, a poster maybe, and she was crying so hard her whole body was shaking. Judy stared at her for a long moment, and then she did something that Margaret would later say was the most Judy Garland thing she'd ever seen. She walked out of the dressing room, still in her robe and half-finished makeup, and headed for the stage door. Margaret called after her. "Judy, you're not even dressed yet. The show starts in 20 minutes. "I know," Judy said without turning around. "I'll be quick." She pushed open the stage door and stepped into the alley. The cold December air hit her face. Sarah didn't notice her at first. She was too lost in her own misery. Judy walked closer, her heels clicking softly on the pavement. "Excuse me," Judy said gently. "Are you all right?" Sarah looked up. For a moment, she didn't recognize the woman standing in front of her. Her face was only half made up, her hair was in curlers, and she was wearing a plain robe. But then Sarah saw the eyes. Those eyes she'd seen 100 times on album covers and movie posters. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered. I'm Judy," Judy said with a small smile. "And you're crying in an alley behind my theater. So, either I did something terrible to you or something terrible happened to you. Which is it?" Sarah couldn't speak. She just stared, her mouth open, tears still streaming down her face. Judy knelt down in front of her, not caring that her robe was dragging on the dirty ground. "Sweetheart," Judy said softly, "talk to me. What happened?" Sarah finally found her voice. I came all the way from Ohio. I saved for 18 months. I just wanted to see you perform. But the show is sold out and I can't afford a scalp ticket and She broke down again, unable to finish. Judy didn't say anything. She just looked at this young woman, this girl who had traveled hundreds of miles and saved every penny just to see her sing. And something inside Judy shattered, because Judy Garland knew what it felt like to be powerless. She knew what it felt like to want something so badly and to have it ripped away. She'd spent her entire childhood at MGM being told she wasn't good enough, pretty enough, thin enough. She'd been given pills to wake up and pills to fall asleep. She'd been worked until she collapsed. And through it all, the only thing that kept her going was the hope that maybe, just maybe, she could bring a little joy to people who needed it. And here was someone who needed it. Someone who had given everything just for the chance to hear her sing. Judy wasn't going to let this girl go home heartbroken. Not if she could help it. She stood up and took Sarah's hand. "Come with me." Sarah looked up at her, confused. "What? Come with me," Judy repeated. "You came all this way. You're not leaving without seeing the show." "But I don't have a ticket," Sarah stammered. Judy smiled. That enigmatic, beautiful smile that had captivated audiences for decades. "Honey, I'm Judy Garland. I don't need a ticket to get you into my own show." She pulled Sarah to her feet and led her toward the stage door. The security guard standing there saw them coming and stepped forward. "Miss Garland, you can't watch me," Judy said firmly. "This young lady is my guest tonight. She'll be watching from backstage." "But Miss Garland," the guard started. The theater manager said. "I don't care what the theater manager said," Judy interrupted. "This girl traveled 600 miles to see me perform. She's not going home empty-handed. Now, are you going to let us in? Or do I need to cancel tonight's show and tell everyone why?" The guard hesitated. He knew Judy's reputation. She was known for being kind to fans, but she was also known for being stubborn when she believed in something. He stepped aside. "Thank you," Judy said sweetly, and walked Sarah inside. The backstage area of the Palace Theater was chaos. Stagehands were moving equipment. Musicians were tuning their instruments. Lighting technicians were adjusting spotlights. And in the middle of it all was Judy Garland, still in her robe, holding the hand of a sobbing factory worker from Ohio. Margaret rushed over. "Judy, what are you doing? You need to get dressed." "I know," Judy said, "but first I need you to find a chair. Put it in the wings, stage left. This young lady is going to watch the show from there." Margaret looked at Sarah, then back at Judy. "You're serious. Completely serious. Now go." Margaret hurried off. Judy turned to Sarah. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Sarah whispered. "Sarah Mitchell." "Well, Sarah Mitchell," Judy said, squeezing her hand. "Welcome to the Palace Theater. You're about to have the best seat in the house." Tears were streaming down Sarah's face, but this time they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of disbelief, of gratitude, of pure, overwhelming joy. "I can't believe this is happening," Sarah said. "I can't believe you're doing this for me." Judy's expression softened. "Honey, I've been where you are. I know what it's like to feel invisible. I know what it's like to want something so badly it hurts. And if I can give you one night where you feel seen, where you feel like you matter, then that's worth more than any sold-out show." Margaret returned with a chair. She placed it in the wings, just off to the side of the stage where Sarah would have a perfect view. Judy led Sarah to the chair and gently sat her down. "Now," Judy said, "you sit right here. Don't move. Don't talk. Just watch. And when it's over, you come find me in my dressing room. We'll talk more then." "Okay." Sarah nodded, unable to form words. Judy smiled, then turned and walked back to her dressing room to finish getting ready. 15 minutes later, the lights in the theater dimmed. The orchestra began to play the overture, and Sarah Mitchell, sitting in the wings of the Palace Theater, felt like she was living in a dream. The curtain rose. Judy Garland walked onto the stage, and the audience erupted in applause. For the next 2 hours, Sarah watched Judy perform. She sang every song with such emotion, such raw vulnerability, that Sarah found herself crying again, but for a completely different reason. She was crying because she finally understood why she loved Judy Garland so much. It wasn't just the voice. It wasn't just the songs. It was the way Judy poured her entire soul into every note, the way she made you feel like she was singing directly to you, like she knew your pain and was telling you that you weren't alone. From her vantage point in the wings, Sarah could see things the audience couldn't. She could see Judy's hands shaking slightly before certain songs. She could see the brief moments of exhaustion that flashed across her face between numbers. She could see the way Judy would glance toward the wings, catch Sarah's eye, and give her a small, secret smile. It was the most magical night of Sarah's life. When the show ended, the audience gave Judy a standing ovation that lasted nearly 10 minutes. Judy took her bows, blew kisses, and finally exited the stage. As she walked past Sarah, she stopped. "Come on," she said, taking Sarah's hand. "Let's get you properly introduced." Judy led Sarah back to her dressing room. Margaret was already there, along with a few other members of Judy's inner circle. Everyone looked exhausted but happy. Judy sat down heavily in her chair and began removing her stage makeup. Sarah stood awkwardly near the door, still not quite believing any of this was real. Judy looked at her in the mirror. "So, Sarah from Ohio, what did you think?" Sarah paused, searching for the right words. "It was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Thank you. Thank you for letting me watch. Thank you for—" She choked up again. Judy turned around in her chair. "Sweetheart, come here." Sarah walked over, and Judy took both of her hands. "Listen to me," Judy said, her voice serious now. "I want you to remember something. You're not invisible. You matter. Your dreams matter. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. You saved for 18 months to see me perform. Do you know how extraordinary that is? That's dedication. That's passion. That's love. And that's worth more than all the money in the world." Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face for what felt like the 100th time that night. Judy reached over to her dressing table and picked up a playbill from the show. She signed it with a flourish, then wrote something else underneath her signature. She handed it to Sarah. "This is for you. A reminder that magic is real, and that you deserve every bit of it." Sarah looked down at the playbill. Under Judy's signature, she'd written, "To Sarah, who traveled 600 miles to follow a dream. Never stop believing in magic. With all my love, Judy." Sarah clutched the playbill to her chest. "I'll never forget this. Never." "Good," Judy said with a smile. "Because I won't either." But the story doesn't end there. Before Sarah left, Judy did something else. She pulled Margaret aside and whispered something to her. Margaret nodded and left the room. When she returned a few minutes later, she handed Sarah an envelope. "What's this?" Sarah asked. Judy smiled. "Open it." Inside the envelope was $50 in cash. Sarah looked up at Judy, confused. "I don't understand." "You spent all your money getting here," Judy said. "You need to eat. You need to get home. That's for your trip back to Ohio. And before you argue with me, consider it a gift from one dreamer to another." Sarah tried to protest, but Judy held up her hand. "No arguments. Just take it and promise me something." "What?" Sarah asked. "Promise me that when you have the chance to help someone else, someone who's struggling and scared and desperate for a little magic, you'll do it. You'll be the person who opens the door for them, just like I did for you tonight." Sarah nodded, unable to speak. "Promise." Sarah Mitchell left the Palace Theater that night with a signed playbill, $50, and a memory that would sustain her for the rest of her life. She took the bus back to Ohio the next day. She went back to her factory job. She went back to her small town and her ordinary life. But she was different now. She'd seen behind the curtain. She'd met the woman behind the legend. And she knew with absolute certainty that magic was real. Over the years, Sarah kept her promise. She became a teacher. She worked with underprivileged kids in her community. And whenever she saw a child who felt invisible, who felt forgotten, who felt like they didn't matter, she would find a way to let them know that they did. She would be their Judy Garland, the person who opened the door when everyone else had closed it. In 2001, 40 years after that night at the Palace Theater, Sarah wrote a letter. She addressed it to the Judy Garland estate. In it, she told the full story of December 3, 1961. She described the crying in the alley, the kindness Judy had shown her, the promise she had made. And she ended the letter with these words: "Judy Garland saved my life that night, not in a dramatic Hollywood way, but in the way that matters most. She saw me when I felt invisible. She cared when I thought no one did. She gave me hope when I had none left. And she taught me that true greatness isn't about fame or fortune. It's about using whatever power you have to lift up the people who need it most." I've spent 40 years trying to live up to the example she set that night. And I'll spend the rest of my life being grateful that she opened her dressing room door for a struggling factory worker from Ohio. The letter was published in a Judy Garland biography in 2002. And when people who knew Judy read it, they weren't surprised. Because stories like Sarah's weren't rare. They happened all the time. Theater ushers from the 1950s and 60s have dozens of accounts of Judy sneaking fans into sold-out shows. Security guards remember her arguing with management on behalf of people who couldn't afford tickets. Band members recall her stopping mid-rehearsal to talk to fans who'd been waiting outside for hours just to meet her. Judy Garland understood something that many celebrities never grasp. She understood that her fans weren't just customers. They were people who had invested their hopes, their dreams, their emotional well-being in her music. They were people who turned to her songs when life became unbearable. They were people who needed to know that someone out there understood their pain. And Judy, despite her own struggles, despite the pills and the breakdowns and the financial disasters, never forgot that. She never forgot what it felt like to be powerless. So, whenever she had the chance, she used her power to help someone else. The night she found Sarah crying in that alley, Judy could have walked past her. She could have let security handle it. She could have gone back to her dressing room and focused on her own problems. God knows she had enough of them. But that wasn't who Judy Garland was. When she saw someone hurting, someone who had given everything for just a moment of magic, she couldn't ignore it. She had to help, even if it meant defying theater management, even if it meant delaying her own preparations, even if it meant giving away money she probably didn't have. Because to Judy Garland, that's what it meant to be a star. Not the fame, not the accolades, not the sold-out shows or the standing ovations. It was the ability to make someone feel seen, to make them feel valued, to give them a moment of pure, unfiltered joy in a world that so often felt cruel and indifferent. Sarah Mitchell died in 2019 at the age of 77. She was a beloved teacher, a devoted mother and grandmother, and a pillar of her community. In her obituary, her family mentioned that her most treasured possession was a signed playbill from a Judy Garland concert in 1961. They didn't know the full story behind it. Sarah had kept that private, sacred, something between her and Judy. But in her will, Sarah left instructions. The playbill was to be donated to the Judy Garland Museum in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. Along with it was a handwritten note that read simply, "She opened the door when everyone else closed it. I hope this reminds people that true kindness never dies." The playbill is on display there now. Visitors stop and look at it, reading Judy's inscription. Most of them don't know the story. They just see a signature and a sweet message. But for those who do know, for those who have heard about the night Judy Garland found a crying fan in an alley and refused to let her go home heartbroken, that playbill represents something much bigger. It represents the kind of person Judy Garland really was. Not the manufactured Hollywood image. Not the tragic figure battling addiction and mental illness. But the woman who, in her finest moments, used her power to create magic for people who needed it most. The woman who never forgot what it felt like to be powerless. The woman who opened doors that others had slammed shut. That's the Judy Garland story that deserves to be told. Not just the tragedy, not just the talent, but the compassion, the humanity, the stubborn, beautiful refusal to let anyone feel as alone as she so often did. Because on December 3, 1961, in a dirty alley behind the Palace Theater, Judy Garland could have walked away. But she didn't. She stopped. She listened. She cared. And in doing so, she changed a life forever. That's not just a good story. That's a blueprint for how to use whatever power you have, however small, to make the world a little less cruel. That's a reminder that fame means nothing if you don't use it to lift up the people who can't lift themselves. Judy Garland sang about rainbows and dreams and places over the rainbow where troubles melt like lemon drops. But the real magic wasn't in the songs. It was in moments like these. Moments when she proved that those dreams weren't just fantasies. They were real, and they were worth fighting for. Sarah Mitchell traveled 600 miles to see Judy Garland perform. She went home with so much more. She went home with proof that the world could be kind, that stars could be human, that magic was real if you believed in it hard enough. And for 58 years, until the day she died, Sarah carried that lesson with her. She opened doors for others. She saw people when they felt invisible. She gave hope when others had none. Because Judy Garland had shown her how. That's the legacy. Not the movies, not the songs, but the lives touched, the hearts healed, the doors opened when everyone else had closed them. Judy Garland died in 1969, at the age of 47. She died broke, exhausted, and struggling with demons that would ultimately consume her. The world mourned the loss of a legend. But for people like Sarah Mitchell, the loss was personal. They didn't just lose a performer. They lost someone who had seen them, someone who had cared, someone who had proven that even in the darkest moments, there was still kindness in the world. The next time you hear Judy Garland sing over the rainbow, listen closely. Listen to the longing in her voice, the hope, the desperate belief that somewhere, somehow, there's a place where dreams come true. That wasn't just a song to Judy. That was her mission, to create those moments, to be the person who opened the door and said, "Come on in. You belong here too." And on a cold December night in 1961, she did exactly that for a crying factory worker in an alley. She opened the door. She gave her a seat. She gave her hope. And in doing so, she proved that true stardom isn't measured in ticket sales or awards. It's measured in the lives you touch when no one's watching, when there are no cameras, no reporters, just you and someone who needs to know they matter. That's who Judy Garland was. And that's the story that should never be forgotten.